last class. This we will actually have it for a half an hour time span because like by 6 o'clock there is a meeting where women employee needs to attend. So by 6 o'clock we will close the session. 6 o'clock Indian time we will close the session. Just a reminder, like for the first initial, the first three sessions, the quiz has been sent. Please actually complete it by tomorrow, and by tomorrow we will release the next set of quiz questions. Okay, over to Rahman now. You can start the session.
Okay, yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. Uh, Let me know if you're able to see my screen. Is it visible for everyone? Is it visible now?
Yes, Rahman,
Okay,
I'm able to see.
okay, all set. Okay, fine. So, hello everyone, this is Mohammed. So today is the session 7 of eTRM refresher training. And before jumping into session 7, I just want to uh, recover and what we have went through in session number 6. Okay. So in the session 6, we have discussed about the how exactly the global declaration plays a key role in eTRM configuration. uh, I would probably do a demo, live demo tomorrow, or to show exactly how we can consume the global declaration of references, inputs, and outputs. But I believe that the global declaration for data tables or number, and how exactly it has an impact to the measure calculation, and what is the advantages of having the global declarations have been covered in my previous session, including mapping a table at authority level, and how exactly you can change it at a global level, which will have an impact to all the local measures that has consumed, including the global inputs and outputs, where you can declare once, and there will be integrity maintained across the global declaration and the measures that have consumed, and in which scenario you know that the integrity will get broken if there is alteration done at the local measure level. Okay, so all this have been discussed for global inputs and outputs declarations, and the key thing is about how exactly you can work as a team, that initially the global set can be prepared from the initial analysis, and just try to add the first set of global variables, probably the global outputs and inputs, to start up with. And once you start configuring the measures, uh, like say for example, after 3 to 4 days, you get to know the list of the global declaration might increase, and the users can consume them accordingly. Like the team who is working for the particular client can just simply go and click the import button that is available in under specifications, references, and in the output sections of eTRM. Under every measure for that particular authority, they can start consuming them. Okay, so that's the purpose of having the global declarations. And the topic which we discussed in the last session was the types of rules that we have in the eTRM specification, which is quite similar to how you define in eTrack plus plugin in the forms. So you can control all these rules by using the attribute names of a specification. The attributes names are nothing but you see this as a column called name, that these are termed as attribute names. So every specification can be controlled using the attribute names of the specification. So you can just simply start writing the expression by editing a specification, and you just simply enable which rule you want to apply based on the particular condition. And you can define your own expression by using the attribute names of the specifications used with by adding the operators, the commonly which you use, which is the comparative and the logical operators we have, the and or gets, including the other operators we have. Okay, so all these things can be combined together to write the expressions of your own requirements, and this will be handled for every specification of your own requirement. Okay, So we have visibility rules, on change, read only, and requirement rule. So in the last session, we have covered these two rules as a part of the session number 6. So like I said, the visibility is nothing but whenever the if the rules is it becomes true. Say for example, if quantity greater than 1, then that means that the rule has satisfied and it becomes true. That means that the particular specification will be visible for the user in the calculation screen. The same thing in the eTRM plus plugin. So if the expression becomes false, that means that if the quantity is lesser than 1, taking this as an example, then the specification will not be exposed to the user in the calculation screen. That's the purpose of having the visibility rule, just like how you control fields in the forms, right? In eTRM plus side. So same thing we have in eTRM. Okay, so that's the purpose of having visibility rule. So this is common across for all the measures. The visibility rule can be applied. And the second important thing is to talk about the on change rule we already have. So this is quite similar to how you do. So when taking this as a simple example we have, you can construct an expression and you can just simply write which specification has to get updated based on certain condition. So if you remember that I have written a simple condition where if my dryer type is vented, I have written a visibility rule to update measure life as 10. Okay, if the driver type is ventless, then update a measure life as 20 or 40, whatever. So in order to control values from to another specification, you need to write an on-change expression. That means that whenever there is a change in a value from the drop down or from a user input, like if a number from 10 to 11, by whenever users performs an operation in the calculation window, the on-change rule will shoot and the expression will get executed if the condition has been satisfied. Okay. So in this case, what I've given as an expression that if input 1 is greater than 100, then update this input to which is an attribute name for a specification, just populated a value called 200. If the input 1 is, say for example, doesn't qualify, then this else statement will execute it. That means that the on-change expression will execute and it will update the value as 300. Okay, so that is the purpose of having an on-change rule. So in the similar way, you can you can extend your on-change expression by combining with the date attributes. Say for example, if the date is between 2022, like from starting date from Jan 2022 till December 2022, you can update any field of your own choice. The only thing is that the source specification has to get updated with the on-change rule. That means that if you want to control volume based on the date input, then you need to write your on-change expression the date input field. That means that go to the date input, okay, and just click on on-change rule over here, and using the parse date function, like parse date function like I've mentioned here, just include the attribute name of this one, and you can construct if something is beyond a particular date, like you can use parse date again. So in the similar way, you can write the source field that needs to accommodate this on-change rule. Only then the target will get updated accordingly. Okay, this is the purpose of having the on-change rule. But for the visibility rule, which specification wants to get controlled, you can just simply write the visibility rule in the same specification. Doesn't have to accommodate the source and target, but the whichever specification needs to get controlled, you can just simply write the visibility rule in that particular specification. So these are the two rules that we have discussed. So let me cover I think the next rules we have, the pending ones for today. So today is the session number 7. So the agenda of today is that we have two rules in eTRM, that is the read only rule and required when rule that has to be covered today. And the output visibility rules we also have. And third is the custom method calculation. Probably we could not be able to cover for today's sessions due to limited time, but I will try to complete the first, second items for the agenda today. Okay. So the read only rule is quite similar to how you specify the visibility rule. If, say, for example, if the condition becomes true, then the specification becomes a non-editable specification. That means that, say, for example, if my city is New York, just taking a simple example, if this condition is satisfied, then whichever specification that you have written with the read only rule becomes in the read only mode, And if the condition becomes false, then the specification becomes editable for the user. That means that if it's a list, then the dropdown gets enabled. The user can select the dropdown of and do the calculation. If it's a number, then whatever value that I have given will stay as it is. Okay. If you want me to show an example, say for example, if the quantity, just want to make the quantity as a read-only rule, that means that if you want to make this quantity, what I can do, I can just simply read-only rule over here. Say for example, uh, let's take dryer type as ventless. I want to make this measure life as a read-only rule. Then what I can do, I can just make uh, go to the dryer type. Okay, I can choose of any choice like dryer type as printed. Okay. Okay, if this particular situation I have just given the dryer type is vented, then make this field as a read-only mode. But what I did was I have just given an expression in the dryer type specification itself. But ideally, what we need to do is that you just have to write in the target specification. That means that if dryer type is say for example, let me cancel this one. Let me go to the quantity, and I am making this quantity as a read-only rule only when the dryer type is vented. That means that if dryer type is equal to vented, that means that this specification will go to read-only mode when the dryer type is vented. Okay, let me validate this one. And what I'm going to do, then okay, I think I need to remove this one over here. Let me remove this one. Okay, if it's, let me go to the ventless. See, the quantity is become in the read-only mode. Okay, if it's given ventilate, that means that the expression that I have written has become false. That means the quantity can be editable by the user. If I given the dryer type as vented, then the quantity will retain its value no matter what, but the quantity becomes in the read-only mode. Okay, so if you want a particular specification to go in the read-only mode, you can write any specification of based on your requirement. You can even write based on multiple if-else statements, and you can just handle any specifications accordingly to make it read-only or not. Okay, it's quite similar to the on-change rule where you need to write the source and destination. Similarly, you can just write a read-only rule based on the condition based from the other specification as well. So this is the purpose of having the read-only rule, just to make the specification as read-only for the user. Okay, but having said that, the value whatever we have inputted will remain as it is. The only control the system will do is that it will just make this specification in the read-only mode. Okay, so that is the purpose of having a read-only mode. Fine. And lastly, so we have the recent implementation where we have included the requirement rule. So this rule was recently introduced. That means that this rule will only be applicable when the specification is marked as is mandatory. That means what is the purpose of is mandatory is that, so if you have went through any eTRM specification, if you edit a specification in eTRM, there will be a flag called is mandatory. That means that no matter what, if the specification has been marked with true for is mandatory, that means that this specification will have an identifier marked with star that indicates that this specification is mandatory for the user to input no matter what. Say for example, if I clear a result, if since this is mandatory, the system will always throw an error that this dryer type is mandatory. The same thing applies for any API calls done through a data load process or from any external system. If they try to access our ETRM system and if they don't provide a value for this particular measure, and if the particular measure is empty or they have not defined through any job load data load process, that means that the dryer type, it will throw an error that this dryer type is mandatory and no calculation will happen. The system will just return values as 0. Okay, so that's the purpose of having is mandatory. You can specify based on requirement that whether the required specification is mandatory or not by simply turning on this attribute as true or false. Okay, So we have introduced another rule called requirement rule. This will appear only when you make this mandatory as true. Okay. So if you want this specification to be mandatory only based on certain condition, we have introduced this rule, because in earlier, if you make this mandatory as true, then the derivative is applicable for every combination. That means that no matter what, the mandatory error will throw for every time. But what we have done say for example, let me make this one as is mandatory as false. Say for example, let me go to the quantity. I have make this as mandatory only when, if I'm just cutting this condition, going to record when rule, only when dryer type is vented. Okay, that means that the quantity is applicable only when the dryer type is vented. Okay, uh, I know that these examples are quite irrelevant, but I just want you guys to understand what is the purpose of having is mandatory. Though is mandatory is not been advised for users to configure for every specification, because it makes our calculation more tedious. It can be added at the very end of the measure approval process, but usually we don't provide this mandatory condition for any specification. But if the requirement demands, just make sure that you enable this flag. And if you have a specific condition where you want to have a particular field based on particular condition, only then just enable this specification and make sure to provide whichever criteria. Okay, so in this expression, make use of the attribute name of the specification, and even you can use you don't want to use if else condition. Unlike on change rule, only in the on change expression you usually write if else statement, because based on particular condition you update a value. But for visibility and for required when and for read only rule, you can just simply write the attribute name followed by any comparator and the value. Okay, so for this simple example, I have given this mandatory when required when, sorry, in the required when rule is updated with dryer type is wanted. That means that, let me go to the dryer type. Okay, this one doesn't have anything. So that means that the quantity is mandatory only when, see, this is not throwing error. If it's vented and if you're not providing any value, that means that the quantity is mandatory. If I provided any value, the system will automatically accept a value. But if I given ventless, I have not given anything, then it will still throw in value. Okay, so that is the purpose of having the the requirement rule. Okay, this is mostly used for data load jobs where, say for example, in the recent implementations, there might be the cases where you might need to add the custom calculation as part of your measure logic, where if you have a custom calculations enabled, and you might be seeking for any input to be mandatory only when the custom calculation is enabled as yes, then you can write a requirement rule to handle that accordingly. If not, if your requirement doesn't need of any mandatory setting for any condition, then you don't have to write requirement rule. Okay, it's totally based on how you want to handle requirement. Okay, so that's how the purpose of mandatory flag as well as the required rule. Okay, so all this we have covered. These are the different set of rules we have for specifications. And coming back to the list of rules we have, so every rule is available for a particular specification. The only thing is that you just have to simply enable them and configure it accordingly. Okay, there might be the cases where for single specification you might be need to write all the rules. There might be just need to write just two of them or just one, or not even any one of them. Is totally based on how you want to handle it. But there might be the cases where you might need to enable every rule based on a requirement, and you need to write expressions according to eTRM to handle the requirements of your clients. Okay, so you can just make use of this rules in eTRM. Okay, and jumping on to the last topic of today's session is where we're gonna talk about the output visibility rules we have. so so in the last session we have already covered about the visibility rule, right? So same thing, we have a control in outputs. So the output, the visibility rule in the output is nothing but, say take any instance where uh, you might be the cases where based on if the fuel type is electric, okay, you don't want to show terms for the user, then you can write a visibility rule for the outputs. stating that if the fuel type is electric, then make and don't show the terms. Okay, if the fuel type is gas, then show the terms. So you can, we do have a control in the eTRM to to show and hide output accordingly. So what you have to do is that just go to the outputs. Say for example, taking this as an example, if you want to control the del terms based on particular condition, simply scroll down, enable this rule. In this, for outputs, we have just having one rule called visible based on the rule. So say for example, let me take the fuel type. Okay, I'm going to the outputs window. Let me edit this del terms. So what I'm going to do, if fuel type visible only when the fuel type is gas, right? So I'm going to validate this one. This has passed. So I'm just copy pasting the attribute name of the specification followed by the value, which I'm getting from the data table. So I'm going to save this one. Okay. So once I've applied the rule, you could have noticed that the in the primary section, the del terms output is not been exposed. So what you have to do, if you have any cases where if you want to show the gas, only then the condition gets satisfied. That means that the visibility rule gets satisfied, and you need to the terms will be exposed to this. In this way, you can control the outputs based on the visibility rules that you can define for every specification. But note that this output-based control is not been applied in eTrack Plus plugin as well as in the API calls. Right now, it's been just applied in the eTRM calculation window in the UI side. But if perhaps we have a ticket in the queue where we need to address this behavior of controlling outputs based on a condition in the eTrack Plus plugin as well as through any API calls from, say, for example, from Postman or from Salesforce. So that's still under in progress. Okay. So these are all the topics for today. So I'm concluding the session since we have another call and by 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So let me wind up the session for today. So feel free to ask any questions on rules and output visibility conditions.
Thank you, Abhibur, and thank you all. So we are closing today's session. So by 6 o'clock there is a meeting. Uh, we will uh, we will connect tomorrow as per the schedule. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.